Welcome in week 6 of Gridiron Eve. I'm John Vogel. He's Mike Huesmann, and we are the Gridiron Eve show. We'll be talking about our picks. Missed last week. Apologize to anybody who might have been looking to tune in for some betting advice on the next following game. But, you know, life happens. Things happen. Tragedy happened this past week with the hurricane sweeping through, Hurricane Ian through Florida and up the East Coast. So definitely we wish all of those people the very best. But Mike, let's talk about some football. Let's start to get back to normal. How are you doing tonight, man?
Good. I'm doing well. So I'm coming to you live from New Orleans, Louisiana. And while I am not one, it may please you to hear that we are having a Vols takeover in my hotel and the one next door to me. They are down here in full force for the Vols LSU game tomorrow. Baton Rouge is only about an hour away, so it's a quick drive up the highway, and should be a fun one there.
It should. It's going to be a good game. I actually had someone trying to do a Zoom call with me this weekend to discuss some different things, and I told him, I said, it's got to be after the Tennessee LSU game. Because if you try to talk to me during that game, I'm not going to be focused at all. I'm sorry. So, yeah, that's going to be – we'll get in that game. That's in my picks this week. A couple things first is head coaches, right? There's been some head coaches that have moved around in college football over the last week or so, I guess, or 2 weeks, as early firings have started to come in much earlier than we're used to seeing. Paul Chryst is gone from Wisconsin. I know that there's Colorado's coach was fired this past week. Obviously, as we discussed earlier, Herm Edwards is gone from Arizona State. I know I'm missing somebody there. I know that you know. You're going to correct me here in a second.
So, yeah, Herm Edwards went before. Then, obviously, Scott Frost was earlier, and Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech, I think, was the other one who
Georgia Tech, that's who
actually pulled out a win under their interim. So, yeah,
Georgia Tech has had a talented roster. They just weren't able to retain a lot of the talent that they wanted to, this past offseason with the transfer portal. Jahmyr Gibbs to Alabama is pretty.
Absolutely. I mean, he's one of the best running backs anywhere, and to lose him to such a big program, it would hurt anybody. But from his point of view, you also get the move too. It's for his future. It's probably the best for him.
Exactly.
And then we had, with Georgia Tech,
what basically brought this up. I apologize. It's my internet issues. Tennessee has not been kind here recently in terms of internet. It's been great. So what it brought this, you wanted to discuss this topic last week, but we were canceled last week. But it was over a tweet that I had made about head coaches and the different openings that could be open at the end of the year. I was doing some speculating, and I mentioned several that I thought that would be open. A couple of them are open now. Colorado obviously was about to get opened up, and I had put that on the list. I think a few of the others that I had on that list were also schools like Mississippi State, and I think I had Texas A&M, and I had a few, I guess people would have considered heavy hitters that things that didn't make too much sense. And I think you wanted to discuss some of that, if that was my understanding.
Yeah, I think it's a fun topic that, the listeners can tune into. And sorry that someone was knocking at my hotel door for some reason. That's why I was distracted. But hold on.
Got to love being on the road. Always the greatest thing ever. But so, no, it's interesting. Texas A&M, I think, is
sorry, John.
School.
I apologize.
You're good.
They wouldn't go away. Like I figured after 2 knocks they would have left, but all to give me a stack of towels, which I didn't ask for. But okay. I thought Mississippi State was a very interesting one on that list. Now, in hindsight, they got a pretty good win last week. I don't know how they'll do
Yes.
the rest of the
Yeah, they
way.
did.
I think it's all relative. It would surprise me if they would move on from Leach, but in a way, it also it feels like a marriage that at some point is bound to end ugly, because he just isn't the type of guy that we would expect down there. He's a heck of a coach. He's done well everywhere, but when things go bad, I think the end could happen pretty quick, in a similar way it did with Joe Moorhead, where some of their people just booster wise say, well, he's not one of us, and that makes an easy exit for someone. Now, I
and I
don't
think
know that it happens.
that was pretty much what happened. That was what happened when Joe Moorhead was the head coach there. And I watched the entire administration and I watched them turn on him in the manner of a bowl game against Louisville, where they blew a 14-0 lead at the Music City Bowl 2019. And it was literally like he walked into that game with some hope and some, hey, this might work out, this might be good. And you blow that 14-0 lead. Kylan Hill gets hurt early in the game, very early in the game.
Yeah.
And it just, everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. He made some bad coaching decisions, and it was at the end of the day, walking out of that stadium, you knew he was going to get fired in the next 48 hours, which is what happened. He was fired, I believe, 2 days later.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it feels like could happen to Leach. And it's not because Moorhead's is a bad coach. It's not because he's, he wasn't doing a good job. I think it was more so he wasn't a fit for the culture or the program that they want. They want a Southern man in there. And I'm not saying that to be racist. I'm not saying that to incite anything crazy, but that's just how Mississippi State operates. They want a Southern man.
You're cutting out, John. We're not getting audio from you right now, but I think John is on to a good topic here of, they might just want a guy that fits their program better. And, when things start to go bad for Mike Leach, that's probably what will happen. And he's a guy that I don't think anybody thinks this is going to be his last head coaching job. This guy's probably going to coach as long as he can, as long as he wants to. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the end will be at some point. I don't think it'll be. I would bet in week 1 next year, Mike Leach is their head coach. But I think it's one of the more interesting ones to talk about. Another one I think that's interesting to talk about wasn't on your list, but it's a team I follow pretty close and would have said going into this year it would never happen. Dana Holgorsen is an interesting one at this point. Houston is really struggling. They are not doing many things well, primarily because their O-line is so bad. But his buyout is ridiculously high. He got a large extension last offseason. You're hearing some clamoring saying he might be on the hot seat. I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if he is, but it's another interesting one to talk about there. And
yeah, I think Houston makes a lot of. Houston's a big one. You came in the year, you were very high on them yourself. I remember that very specifically. We kind of disagreed on that. I didn't see it. But they've had 3 overtime games. They're 1-2 in overtime right now, and they're not to great teams for the most part. So, does Dana hold on another year, or are they going to take this as this was a coin flip year with a lot of these games where we were in a position to win, but we didn't pull it off. We didn't pull it out.
Yeah, well, I happen to think going 11-2 last year probably gained him some grace, and he did get a pretty good extension last offseason. So his buyout, now they do have some pretty significant boosters there. They certainly could afford it. It's whether or not they would want to do that. I would say he's probably closer to the hot seat than Leach is. It's another one I would probably lean towards. He probably keeps his job, but I think he's a little closer to the edge than what we certainly would have thought he was after going 11-2 last year.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Well, let us move on to some picks here. You have your first pick of the day. I'll let you decide what order you want to go with. But where are you? Oh, by the way, we are tied. If I
I'll go for my
remember
first pick of
correctly,
the day.
yet again,
What's that?
we're tied again with
Awesome.
the picks,
Okay.
if I believe.
Okay.
Still tied.
Perfect. I'll start with I like Auburn to cover 28.5 against Georgia tomorrow. Auburn blew a lead last week. They're not looking great on offense. Robbie Ashford does have a little more experience now, but I don't know what about this Georgia team makes people think they'll beat Auburn by 29 points. They're the worst elite team we've seen in years. They have limped through their last two games against Kent State and Mizzou, both of which were in doubt midway through the fourth quarter, or at least, with Kent State, it was a battle anyway, whether it was in doubt or not. But Georgia, Carter's hurt. Certainly they have a lot of depth, but right now, I don't know if you'd say they're elite at any one thing. You could argue their run defense might be. They're pretty good at stopping the run, but they're on offense. They're just not doing much the last couple weeks. And I certainly think they're going to win the game. I don't think Auburn sticks with them enough to win the game, but I think Auburn covers 28.5 points against them tomorrow.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I just broke down this team this week on Twitter, at least on the offense. I hadn't gotten to the defense like I was hoping to. But there were some things they were doing, against this Georgia offense to kind of slow them down and muddle the box for Stetson Bennett, which made him difficult for him to go through reads and things. And it's a lot of one high. It's a lot of different, just man coverage and just putting a lot of players in the box and dropping them into coverage. And that's what's made it difficult for Bennett. The other thing is they don't have a number one receiver. Now, I have a Georgia friend who sit there and tell you they've got their number one guy coming back this week. It's Smith, I believe. And they love him. They think he's going to be great for them and he can stretch the field. I haven't seen that yet from anybody on Georgia that's on that roster currently. And until they have someone who can stretch the field, it's going to be a muddled box for Stetson Bennett, and it's going to be hard for this team to move. I agree. I think that 28.5 is going to be covered by Auburn.
Stretching the field's also an interesting concept for them because we rarely say this with, top-notch teams. Does Bennett have the arm to stretch the field? We've not seen him throw a lot of deep balls lately. Threw a few to Pickens last year, Burton some, but his arm strength isn't elite either. So I think that adds another nuance into that.
Yeah, but if you don't even have the threat of that player going downfield, that's the problem that they have right now. That's really limiting what they can do. And as much as we love Brock Bowers, I know there's people on here that they think of Brock Bowers is going to be a top 5 pick in the 2024 NFL draft. That's not going to happen, and it's because he's not a vertical guy. He's a guy you have to get in space, and he's not a blocker. And I can see him going in the first round. I think that he's going to be a great NFL player, but let's pump the brakes. Let's acknowledge what's going on here because they were trying to use him to block the backside of their gaps, pull when they went to a gap scheme in the second half against Missouri, and he was not holding up the backside. And until they put Darnell Washington in there and used him to come across as the backside blocker, they weren't stopping anybody with that. They weren't getting anything done with the run game. So, but the defense is
Bowers is an interesting one. You hear all the Georgia fans in the SEC homers. He's the best tight end in the country. I'll beat my chest all day that Michael Myers is the best tight end in the country. He's the most versatile. He will be picked higher he'll be picked higher this year than Bowers will be next year, most likely in the draft.
100% agree.
He's the full package. He's going to be Notre Dame's leading receiver 3 years in a row, which is really tough for a tight end to do at that level.
Yep, I agree. I think that's entirely accurate. Yep. So my first pick of the week, I have Louisville -2.5 covering the spread over Virginia. And I like this one because Louisville's kind of come alive over the last couple of weeks offensively. and Virginia has continued to just look like garbage. I mean, you want to talk about a team that cannot execute on offense, it's Virginia right now. And I think everybody who is enamored by Brennan Armstrong, myself included, as a potential NFL quarterback, we've been shown what he really is this year. And really, he's just going to be a backup, maybe a 3, at worst.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's an NFL starter. He's having issues. They have weapons on this offense, too. It's not like they don't. And they cannot get anything moving. I like Louisville covering this game.
That's one of those games where I don't know what to expect because both of those teams are so unreliable. Like we look at, Tony Elliott had great success as Clemson's O coordinator. He's went to Virginia, and what has he done to their offense? They're not effective at doing anything.
They're not.
Now they lost their stud Ola, the leader up front. Oluwatimi transferred to Michigan. That was a huge loss for them, but they still had good pieces returning, and they've not performed. So it's one of those. And Louisville, we've seen them look all right, and then we've seen them look absolutely terrible. So I don't, this is one of those games where I don't trust either team enough to, put a wager on this one. It's just, I think if I had to, I would agree with you. I would go with Louisville, but this is a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all fair too, because they've been two of the most inconsistent schools in the ACC this year. They've been up and down, and they've looked good. I don't think I've seen that. The deal is, I don't think I've seen Virginia look good this year. No. I think that's even when they played Richmond, and I think that's what leads me to believe that Louisville's got a really good chance, and they'll get the win.
Yeah, and on Virginia, we were talking about Virginia's their D hasn't really stopped anybody either. So
no. Now, your second pick, good sir.
You cut out your audio there, John. Do you want me to make my next pick? Okay, so Red River Rivalry is the next one I will pick, and I was a guest on Locked on Longhorns earlier this week, and not just being I'm not a Longhorns homer at all, but I do like the Longhorns to cover this one. I picked them at 6.5. I think they beat the Sooners. Oklahoma's looked poor the last 2 weeks. Against both Kansas State and TCU. Their defense wasn't able to stop anybody. Deuce Vaughn had a field day with them against TCU. Everybody had a field day against them. And I don't think that they'll be able to shut down Texas's offense. Bijan, obviously, we all know how good he is. Worthy's a good receiver. Sanders is having a heck of a year at tight end. We're expecting Ewers possibly to be back. And it's two teams. They're both 3-2, but I think their trajectories are wholly different. With Ewers back, Texas looks to be on the upswing, doing better. Oklahoma right now seems like they're in a tailspin.
Dylan Gabriel is not playing in this game, I don't believe either, is he?
No, he got dinged up, and we just haven't seen a good version of the Sooners in a few weeks. I thought with Jeff Lebby coming in, they would be able to run the ball better. They've ran it. They haven't, their offense hasn't been terrible, but not enough to make up for how poor their defense has been. So I like the Longhorns to win and cover the 6.5 they are favored by tomorrow.
Yeah, I like this bet too, and I agree. I think Texas covers this, and it's just Oklahoma, like you said, their defense hasn't stopped anyone. But I think the real key here is, in the last couple of years, we've seen Oklahoma backup quarterbacks come in these games and look good. Oklahoma doesn't have a 5-star sitting on the bench right now.
No,
they don't have a number one quarterback sitting on the bench right now, getting ready, waiting for his chance to come in when Dylan Gabriel gets hurt. So I don't see. I think that Dylan Gabriel is a big hit. I think Gabriel made a lot of that happen on their offense, from what I've seen, and with him out, it's just, and with the way that Texas can move the ball, Texas can score points. Texas's defense doesn't even have to play extremely well in this game. As long as the offense is scoring points, they'll outshoot them. I think that 2 touchdowns. I'd actually buy points on this, and I believe the line has moved officially to 7.5. At current time. And
I only use that when I did Locked On Longhorns, that was Monday, and it was 6.5, so I just
Right.
kept the same line. But even at moving there, I probably still would take the Longhorns with
Yeah,
that
yeah.
line.
Like I said, I would buy points. I think that you can
Yeah,
bet up to 9.5 very safely on this, and if you want to
yeah,
go extreme, 13.5. I think that
yeah.
you're good doing that. My second pick is my favorite school. I'm repping today, as you can see. I got the hat on and the sweatshirt. Tennessee -3 over LSU, 12 p.m. Eastern time in Baton Rouge tomorrow. And so I'll tell you why I like Tennessee in this game. And it makes me nervous as a Tennessee fan because LSU's defense has been great this year.
Yeah,
If there's
they
been
have.
one part of that team that's done anything exceptionally well, it's been the defense. They've limited team offenses from scoring points. I don't think that anybody scored over 20 on them yet, outside of Florida State in the opener.
Yeah,
I think that they've held everybody right around 17, and so that's terrifying. As a Tennessee fan, because this defense has been so good. But they also have not faced an offense yet quite to the caliber of what Tennessee has put on the board this year with Hendon Hooker at quarterback. Cedric
absolutely.
Tillman is
Yeah,
supposed to be back at wide receiver. And it just looks like if this ends up into a point where Tennessee can score 24, 30 points in this game, they're going to outscore LSU because LSU's offense has not been impressive this year.
no, it hasn't. And I think Tennessee's defense will be able to do enough. They haven't been as good as LSU's be, but when you consider how well, Tennessee's one of those teams so far this year who I feel like they've been a complete team. Most areas of the field, they seem to have it together. They're not really lacking or poor in one area. And if you were going to say there was one, it probably was their receivers. And with Tillman back, that should fix that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's a guy. I don't know if it was you or someone else I mentioned before, but Tim Banks has done an underrated job as a D coordinator there. He's done an effective job under Heupel being there, and I expect that their defense will do enough against a relatively poor offense from LSU that I like the balls in this one too.
And I think the biggest thing too is just the fact that the offense that LSU has come out with this year has been 100% a quick read, one read, and
Yeah,
if it's not there, tuck it, Jaden Daniels, and run for your life. And it's been effective. It's certain, between the 20s, but they've had their red zone struggles. They've struggled to get out of their own when they're backed up, their own part of their own inside their own 20, and all of those things combined, that's where Tennessee has stood up and played well this year. When you look at the Florida game, when you look at the Pitt game, how many times was Pitt and Florida knocking on the door and Tennessee held them up?
yeah.
I believe they have 3 red zone stops straight up where they have takeaways in those 2 games combined.
And I
And
think that's enough. I think that leads to another qualitative feature. Tennessee and Alabama has, but out of the other, teams we're thinking are really good, they've faced adversity and really overcome it. Um,
mhm.
I think the Georgia fans would argue they have, but I almost feel like with Georgia, it's more self-inflicted than it is with the other two teams. So I have trouble comparing Georgia's comebacks to Bama and Tennessee fighting off
Yeah.
the opposition they faced. But you could argue they have. But I think your point led to a really good point that Tennessee has had their backs up against it a few times against decent teams, and they've come out ahead.
Mhm. Your third pick of the week, we're going to stay in the SEC, I believe, for this one.
We are probably my least confident one, but considering we are expecting Bryce Young to be out and Milroe to start, I like Texas A&M to cover the 23 points. Again, I think Alabama will win, but we are expecting Milroe to start. Connor Wegman, we hear, might start for Texas A&M. And Texas A&M was playing at a snail's pace, but their offense is running so slow. I don't think Alabama will play at their normal pace either. I think they're going to run the ball heavier and also play slow. So I just feel like in a limited possession game, Texas A&M's defense, other than last week, has been one of the top ones in the conference and in the country. Now, we are hearing A&M might have a lot of injuries that we don't know about, which could skew how this is going to go. But based on what we know, I like A&M to cover 23 points tomorrow against Bama.
Yeah, I disagree. So here's my 5 points. Bam, chip on the
Okay.
table. And it's
Okay.
because we've seen A&M's offense play absolutely miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand the concern with the quarterback situation in Alabama, and I think it's a very valid concern because we really don't know what that offense is going to look like with Jalen Milroe. What we saw last week was Milroe is an incredible athlete, and there's not much that Alabama needs to do on offense outside of run some RPOs and some zone reads. And between him and Jahmyr Gibbs, you're going to run for 300 yards on this team right now, especially with what they just surrendered last week to Mississippi State. I think Saban's been studying the tape on that, and he's been putting a game plan together that he's going to come out. He's going to come out with a vengeance in this game. He doesn't care who the starting quarterback is. They took them down last year and really held them back, from having a favorable position going into the SEC championship. He's mad. That's the first time he ever lost to an assistant. He is coming back with a full vengeance. I think Alabama wins this by 5 touchdowns.
Okay. Maybe. But that's one I think it'll be an interesting 5 points we have on that game. So
it will be it's always interesting because when I disagree with you, I become very fired up, right?
Yeah.
And I become very okay. Well, maybe I over exaggerate some stuff, but I do think 5 touchdowns is
okay. Yeah.
Alabama typically beats this team very handedly, and we always go into this game saying, A&M's got a really good chance. They have this and that, and outside of last year's game, it never matters. Alabama almost always covers this game.
Okay.
So my third pick is going to the Sun Belt. So staying on the same side of the country, different division, is I like Appalachian State minus 19.5 against Texas State. And Texas State has been one of the lower teams in the Sun Belt. They're honestly probably outside of the top 120 teams in college in the Division I FBS level. And they have a couple players, that we're going to be talking about in the NFL draft next year. I believe the wide receiver Marcel Barbie is one, and there's another tackle or guard, Kyle Herbig or something like that. We'll be talking about him a lot too. 2 NFL players in the Sun Belt against Appalachian State is not enough to help you overcome this matchup. Appalachian State has a great team. They've had a bye week now, so they're coming off of some rest after taking a loss to James Madison. I like them here. Coming off the bye week and just pedal to the metal, baby. We're gonna turn it up against against Texas State, get this division win.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Texas State for me is an interesting team. So when I was a grad assistant at Northwestern State, they were in the Southland with us. They've obviously since made the move up to FBS. But I remember thinking when they hired Jake Spavital as head coach, he had been Dana Holgorsen's old coordinator at West Virginia. I thought that they would improve more than they have. They, for whatever reason, they just haven't been able to turn that corner and consistently get wins since he's been there. So I just don't have any faith in them. That roster just is not nearly deep. You talked about the 2 guys, but that's about it. Like their depth is terrible, and there's a lot of positions. They're just basically they're fielding decent FCS guys at a lot of positions, as bad as that is to say. But that's about what it is. So, John, you still there? I lost a visual on you.
Yeah, I just got a
Okay.
notification. Cedric Tillman will not play tomorrow for Tennessee.
Okay.
He is
Okay.
out.
Okay.
So they figured that is something worth mentioning. Even so, I still think Tennessee -3. I think that's easily coverable.
Yeah.
So moving on to your fourth pick of the night, sir.
I'm going with the Fighting Irish to cover 3.5 against BYU tomorrow. BYU has a better record. They've looked good in a few games. They look very good against Baylor early on, and Notre Dame is a team who has really struggled in earlier when we saw them. But I think that Notre Dame is a team who is moving in the right direction now. I think that they're figuring out a lot of their pieces, putting them together, and they had a nice win against North Carolina. They beat a average Cal team, but I think that Notre Dame gets this one on a neutral site in the Raider Stadium in Las Vegas.
Have you seen the uniforms that Notre Dame's wearing for this game?
So I saw a few different mock-ups. I didn't know which ones they ended up picking though.
So the ones that I saw that they're going to be wearing will be all white with gold numbers, and it has sort of right here. It has like a steeple on both sides. It's interesting.
Okay.
It was very interesting, and I do agree. This is not one of those games that I'm going to be very comfortable betting on tomorrow,
Yeah.
and I very well may leave it alone. It was one of the games to be picked on the ESPN spreads this week, so I definitely took Notre Dame. I like Notre Dame in this one. But not enough for me to say I'm going to put money on this game because this could really go either way, and it's going to all depend on Drew Pine. It's really all comes down to Drew Pine, And when we talked about, at the beginning of the year, when I said when we look at these games, we're going to have to look at the offensive lines and see who has a better offensive line. Then after that, who has the better quarterback, and that's really how you can determine who's going to win a lot of these games. BYU has the better quarterback. Their offensive lines are very even.
They are.
But we've seen the inconsistency from BYU. BYU's defense has struggled at times. Notre Dame's defense, I think, for the most part, has been pretty stout all year. So I like Notre Dame. I would be more comfortable with 2.5 because this very well could be a field goal game.
Certainly could be. Yeah. This is one of those games where I feel like going into it will be a one possession game with 5 or 6 minutes left to go.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if either team, barring fluke turnovers or special teams plays, like how Notre Dame lost against Marshall, this game has the feel like it's two pretty even teams who are going to stick with each other throughout.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
My fourth pick of the week will be I like Kentucky -5.5 over South Carolina. And we've talked a lot about the SEC on this show, and I think it's because number one, right now currently we are both living in the SEC.
Yeah.
And so you've come to experience, I don't know when it was when you were first exposed to it, but you've come to experience campus life in the
Fall
SEC.
of 2019 was my first time living in South Carolina. Yeah.
And so before I go into and start talking about the game, I just want to bring this up because it's an interesting thing to usually talk about. Big Ten or SEC? Because you come from the Big Ten, right?
In what,
you
like,
are a Big Ten.
What are you? I certainly could answer
who's better?
this, but
who's better?
What specifically? Certainly the top end teams in the SEC are better. Absolutely. I think most years those bottom teams is more of a discussion. Though this year I'd argue the bad teams in the Big Ten are also worst. I don't think, the Big Ten West is relatively poor compared to where it's historically been. The East is
it's about where the SEC East was 2-3 years ago.
Correct. Yeah. But Big Ten has 3 good teams out of the East. In the SEC, we have the top teams. But for me, what the decider is this year, those middle of the pack teams in the SEC are better this year.
So atmosphere-wise, who's more lit?
place to place, it's different. I mean, I've been to absolutely wild games at Williams-Brice and Columbia, Death Valley and LSU, but there's also not many game day atmospheres that are going to beat being in Camp Randall either. In Madison's a heck of a place to beat a game. I've never been so the two marquee schools in both conferences, I will say, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. I've not been to any of those four stadiums. So that's hugely skewing where I'm coming from. Kentucky's ho-hum for a home game. Neyland's nice. Ole Miss, one of my favorite stadium-wise, Vata's okay. Campus-wise, Ole Miss is one of my favorites in the country. Razorback Stadium's nice. Kyle Field's crazy too. Kyle Field's awesome. Like it there a lot. Iowa City, Kinnick Stadium, home of Hawkeyes, is great too. Illinois and Champaign is all right. I think that's most of the ones I've been to so far. But atmosphere, yeah, it varies place to place. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the state the teams are in. When your team's competitive and good, you're going to get a better atmosphere.
Yeah, that's true. So I like Kentucky.
I will say, one more atmosphere thing I was going to say. I think the SEC crowds outside of Iowa and Nebraska, they go a little wilder for their schools. And I think a lot of it has to do with most of the major Big Ten schools have NFL teams in close proximity that divide their fans' attention. So I think that's in play there.
Yeah.
But even the Gamecock in me, at 5.5, I like Kentucky a lot. I'm surprised the line is that low. I would have thought it would have been a little more, to be honest. But
I think people are concerned right now because of, Kentucky's lost to Ole Miss this past week.
Yeah.
I watched the game. I came out of that game absolutely convinced that Will Levis is going to be a great NFL quarterback. That was the seller. It was like 3-4 plays in, just watching him drop back and the way he just handles himself, his composure, his mechanics, everything about him I really like. Now, he hasn't had a lot of help with that team. I think that's what's led to a lot of those turnovers, especially on the offensive line. They lost a couple of really good ones to the NFL this year. The center, Fortner, starting in Jacksonville, and the other one is in Chicago, I believe, right now, Kennard. But they've struggled with just being consistent on offense and putting and executing. And so I think that's what's held them back. On defense, they've been pretty darn solid. And so I guess my concern with South Carolina is just Spencer Rattler. We know who Spencer Rattler is now, and just not a great quarterback.
He's been playing. My thing with him, I actually think he's been playing a little better, which his level was so poor the first couple of weeks, it was almost impossible for him not to improve. But in the trenches, they're not very good right now. O-line, they're just not great talent-wise. D-line, their D-line actually is pretty talented. They're just so beat up right now. So their D-line can't stay out of the training room. So we'll see. Yeah, but I don't have faith in the Gamecocks enough to have them cover him tomorrow.
Your last game of the week here, sir.
I like Stanford to go on the road, Stanford at home to cover +7 against Oregon State. It's just one of those games where Oregon State, I don't want to say they're in a tailspin, but they maybe haven't looked as good the last couple of weeks as they did early on. And the style Stanford plays is conducive to keeping games closer. And I feel like it's one of those games where I don't know if they'll win, but I think they keep it really tight as they can do.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think Stanford
cover that 7. Yeah.
Oregon State's been on and off all year. They played really well against USC, and then they just I put the money in on them. I forget who they played last week, right off the top of my head now, but I put the money on them and I lost. So
was it Cal?
I'm probably cutting it out. I apologize.
You are a little bit, but that it was Utah, right? That they got rolled by last week.
Yeah,
Is that right,
that was
John?
it. It was Utah. Yeah, and
Utah.
I had
Yeah.
them covering the
Yeah.
spread, and I got my ass handed to me on that. So
Okay.
that was great. Yep. But
Yeah.
no, I think Stanford has played exceptionally well. So I like Stanford as a team that could potentially upset straight up in this game. I think potentially.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. What's your what's game number 5 for you?
Game 5, and I hope I'm coming in all right because this internet it was working great for 2 minutes and it just decided to take a shit on me.
Yeah. You're a little choppy right now, but so I will take
I'll
the
attempt
lead.
to speak.
Okay.
If I'm coming through clear, I like them.
You were not coming in clear there, John. I hate to say it. But we are going to. I will talk about the last game. So for John's last game, while he gets some technical issues taken care of, John likes Washington State plus 12.5 against USC, and I haven't done this in a while. I'm challenging this one. I actually think the Trojans can get a 2-score win, so I'm going to take USC in this one, partly for the sake of I think they can do it, and partly for the sake of keeping things interesting for us. I think USC is a team who is also gaining momentum, getting, maybe nobody in the FBS had more roster turnover than they did. I think they're getting accustomed to each other, getting used to each other, and they're one of those teams that might be in the right trajectory, like I said about Texas. So I'm going to challenge John on this one and go with the Trojans.
So here's why I like USC. All right, or Washington State. Here's why I like Washington State. Cameron Ward.
Yep.
Cameron Ward. That's why I like him.
He's not been great this year, though.
Washington. He's had his turnover issues. I think that's been the thing. Yes. But when he's not turning the ball over, they're explosive. They hung toe to toe with Oregon for quite some time.
My rebuttal to that would be not turning it over. A big part of the job, though. So
this is true, but it's all going to come together at some point, one way or another.
I actually feel that way too. I 100% feel that way. Yeah.
I think the thing too is outside of that Oregon State game, has USC been a defense that's created turnovers this year?
They created some when they had to late against Oregon State to clinch that drive.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Outside of Oregon State, outside of it, because they picked off Chance Nolan 4 times in that game.
Yeah.
Outside of that game, have they been a team that's created turnovers? I want to say no.
The only other, so I didn't watch them at all against Rice or Fresno, so I can't speak to that. And against Stanford, they did what they had to do, but they weren't real impressive in Stanford in week 2.
I haven't seen them at all really creating turnovers. I haven't. And so if there's one game that Cameron Ward's going to get it all together, it's going to be this game right here.
Okay. Could happen. Yeah, I think it will happen. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow. I do, though. I'm a big Ward guy. I have been since he announced his transferring there. So I really like watching him. But, so far, like a lot of Dylan Gabriel hasn't looked great. Jackson Dart hasn't looked great. We're seeing a lot of portal QBs who are still getting their feet wet underneath them. So I think that's normal. But I am a Ward guy. I think he'll do all right.
Yeah, his dual threat ability is special. He's got a good arm, and I really enjoyed watching him this past week when they were. Or I guess I've watched him a couple times against Michigan State, and then Shoot, I guess I watched them this past week too a little bit when they played Oregon. So
okay, I remember. Yeah, I'd seen a bit of their Wisconsin game.
Yeah, or Wisconsin. That's what I said. Michigan State. I meant Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin.
That was definitely it. So I think with the internet issues that I'm having, we're very fortunate to have gotten through all of our picks.
I'm glad we did. Yeah.
I think that's about all we have wrapped up on here for the show today. Thank you all for tuning in, joining us on Gridiron Eve. He's Mike Huesmann. I'm John Vogel. We'll be back week 7. Now, we'll pray that the internet will be working properly, and it should be a fun time. So be sure to follow him on Twitter at HuesmannCFB. Follow me on Twitter at DraftVogel. Follow the show at Gridiron Eve.